Lex Luthor becoming Superman is every bit as awesome as you would think it would be, and he dominates the Man of Steel. And so what this does is this opens up with Superman and Superwoman basically being blasted by green kryptonite energy coming from Mercy, the assistant of Lex Luthor, and just like Lex Luthor in a tube watching the whole thing go down. So the question has to be asked, how in the world do we get from A to B? What's going on here? Okay, there's a couple things to know about how Lex Luthor attained the powers of Superman. The first one is the situation with Lex himself. This is actually a clone of Lex. It's basically a duplicate. We'll talk about where that comes from here in a second. The main Lex Luthor that you know effectively lost his memory during the events of the House of Brainiac going into absolute power. If you didn't read it, you didn't see our videos, it's not a huge deal. Memory loss is the only real takeaway from all of that stuff. He's slowly been recovering and he basically became a good guy. But because of his past crimes, he was arrested and sent to Stryker's Island. The second thing is Supercorp. Now, Supercorp was basically Lex Luthor leaving LexCorp to Superman so that its resources can be used to create a more effective superhero landscape as far as super people across the world are concerned. But the third thing here is actually what took place in Superman number 24, when you end up learning that when the Justice League faces off against some kind of enemy out there, they're touting like these massive guns. And then Superman and company figure out that Mercy, the assistant of Lex Luthor, the one that he's always kind of banging on the side, that she was using the resources of Supercorp to basically build weapons and then selling them to various groups out there without Superman's knowledge. And that's where she reveals what's going on here with Lex. Now, what's crazy about this is you do get a bit of a background, which is to say, before Lex lost his memories and all that kind of stuff, the idea of Supercorp was just one stage of a plan. It was one phase. That Lex knew somewhere along the line something would happen that would leave him incapacitated. So he and Mercy worked up a whole idea. The concept here was that LexCorp would be given to Superman, and then in turn, Superman would use LexCorp for, whatever it is that he wants to do. But what he had also done is he had cloned himself, and he had basically made this Superman version. He didn't really want to unleash it because in reality, he felt like it was unstable, but Lex would effectively win because with Superman using the resources of LexCorp, and then of course, altering the name, Superman would effectively work for Lex, right? Whether Lex remembered it or not. So it was kind of quote unquote, his way of winning. So what Mercy's doing here in unleashing this clone is actually jumping the gun. So when the clone comes out, he's just sort of like, this is unexpected. And she tells him, events have transpired that forced me to wake you up, sir. What's the last thing you remember? And the only thing it really remembers here is it remembers Superman, the hatred that it has for him. And it says, but I can feel more. Right? And then in turn, he sees his daughter Lena over there. So again, kind of regaining a lot of these memories. Now, a lot of that is because when this version of Lex was built, it took place before House of Brainiac and it took place before Absolute Power and some other stories that happened between its creation and now. So those gaps haven't been quite filled in yet. It's even a surprise to Lex that Lois Lane is Superwoman. Now, of course, that happened in the aftermath of Absolute Power when people's abilities were kind of switched around, people were granted new powers, different things like that. And so that's when you learn the reason why Mercy had done this in the first place is that when Lex lost his memories and became a good guy, that he no longer wanted to go back to being a villain. Yes, his memories were coming back and he was starting to remember a lot of things that were happening, but while this clone just sat in the tube the whole time, the real Lex Luthor was kind of backtracking on his goal to destroy Superman. He was backtracking on his plan of like ending all things in existence that had to do with Superman and so on and so forth. And Mercy didn't like that. She missed the version of Lex who was cunning and ruthless, willing to destroy Superman by any means necessary. And it kind of makes sense. There is a sort of attraction to a person who's willing to do whatever they need to do in order to come out on top. There's a kind of sexiness about ruthlessness, to be honest with you guys. And so once you get this bit of a revelation, that in turn, cloned Lex immediately attacks Superman. And he literally says, I'm following my orders. And now I can show off what my genius has created, how I was built to kill Superman. He's like, this Superwoman is just a bonus. Now, the whole time, remember, Mercy had them bombarded with green kryptonite radiation. Of course, green weakens them and ultimately kills Superman. Red basically takes his powers away, and there's all kinds of different types of kryptonite that have different effects, but they're severely weakened. What's crazy about this is even when Superman starts to regain his abilities again, he still gets crushed. Now, at that moment, you pick up with the real Lex Luthor, who's, again, currently being taken to Stryker's prison. A lot of that is because even though he'd lost his memories, he's still accountable for the things he'd done in the past, right? Not remembering the things that you'd done does not change the fact that you did them. And so he's got to serve some kind of a sentence for this stuff. And so initially he kind of starts to break out, but then ultimately he's actually rescued by the spirit of Metropolis. Now, the spirit of Metropolis is actually a woman named Marilyn, and she's relatively new. In fact, she was created during the Joshua Williamson run, this run of Superman. The long and short of it is that she's kind of a self-fulfilling story, right? That in the early days of Metropolis, she witnessed herself from the future, but didn't know it was herself. She ended up becoming a vigilante through inspiration. And then in Superman issue number 10, it was established that after she had died, several hundred years later or what have you, she was resurrected with light-based powers. And so that's why she looks the way that she is now. The long and short of it is that there is some history between her and Lex, but she's just a means of escape at the moment, right? Because Lex, trying to atone for his past misdeeds, tells her, like, just get me to Metropolis. So at this point, you've got two versions of Lex Luthor running around. You've got the real Lex Luthor, then you have the clone he made and never wanted to release due to its instability. And so while Lex is beating the crap out of Superman, he's actually talking to Mercy about how it all worked, right? How this is remarkable. The fact that he has Superman's powers. And Mercy even goes so far as to say, like, this was your whole structure. I simply just updated it. And even Superman comments, right? He says, you're strong, but it's the kryptonite that gives you an advantage. I cannot win here. And so he grabs Lois and takes off. And that's kind of the nature of things, right? Being away from the influence of green kryptonite, everything kind of starts to return to normal. But even Lex tells him, like, you're out of time, Superman. Did you really believe that I would build a body that only has your abilities of strength or maybe speed? No, I also gave myself the power of flight. And so in that moment, the real Lex Luthor arrives on the scene, and it provides a kind of momentary relief for Superman and Superwoman while it allows Lex to deal with the clone that was created. And here's a crazy thing, right? We actually start to get some indication on what's really going on here, because the clone sees Lex and he says, you must be the real me, right? Like, you grew a beard and lost your mind and you brought a friend. I recognize this woman, Marilyn. But at the end of the day, Lex tells him, stand down, right? Like, you think you're the real Lex Luthor, but you're not. I don't know how you got free, but I'm absolutely going to put you back. And even the clone Lex tells him, like, well, Mercy let me out. And that's where Lex says, then I got to put you away and she and I are going to have a conversation, because the reality here is she has no idea what she's done. There's a reason why I never wanted to release you in the first place. And so initially, Superman and Lois stand down, because they realize that this is actually a Lex Luthor fight, right? This really isn't a Superman fight, at least not in the immediate. And so Lex does what he can, where he can, but then suddenly clone Lex starts talking about how much pain he's in, right? How much it hurts. He's like, what in the world is happening to me? And then he says, me feel great. And he's like, no, this is wrong. Something's wrong. And Lex tells him, this is why I told Mercy to never free you. You were made by the same technology I used to create my version of Bizarro. And just as he was flawed and broken, so are you. And until I could crack the code, it was not safe, but I can help you. Now, again, it kind of comes intermittently, right? Where he says things like, Metropolis, my home. For years, you rejected me, embraced an alien, an outsider. And if I can't have you, no one can. Then the world will know I am the one true Lex Luthor. And so in that moment, Superman and Lois jump back into the conflict again, right? Kind of having a moment of relief, clearing the streets. And so they step into the conflict. Now, of course, Superman uses his ice breath and freezes Lex, and Lex kind of taunts him a little bit. He's like, really? He's like, you're not taking this seriously if you're going to use frost breath on me and try to freeze me in place. He says, I always said my brains were mightier than your brawn. Perhaps I should use them, and just headbutts the crap out of Superman. Now, here's the background undergoing plot throughout the entirety of the Superman story. Yes, Superman and Lois were visited by Doomsday from the future, who's the time trapper, and told them things are going to get really hard and get really dark. And Superman is going to find himself going down a very dark path. I'm the only one who can save you, ally yourself with me. And ultimately they were like, no, we're not going to ally ourselves with Doomsday. That's never going to happen. But the other part of this is that Superman is holding this kind of rage back. He has these moments where it just sort of pops out. He loses control for a moment. And so he's always trying to keep himself under control. And that's why they say his red K levels are rising. Things are kind of skyrocketing here. The reality is that if he loses control, there's no telling what he could do. And even Lois tells him, like, you have to stay in control. You cannot lose control of yourself. But then Lex grabs Lois, and then he starts to taunt her, right? He was like, we both have powers now. I didn't think I needed them before, but I gotta say, I enjoy being able to beat the crap out of Superman with my bare hands. Maybe it's time we finally stop pretending and admit we are the power couple that Metropolis needs. And even Lois recognizes there's something very off here, that Lex is not simply being Lex Luthor. It's one thing for him to gain the powers of Superman and for him to momentarily allow his mind to go nuts and for his maniacal side to cut loose. This is different. He's descending into madness. He's losing himself. And he says, you never knew me, Lois. Not really. Now you get to watch as I do all the things I should have done years ago. Nothing's holding me back. After I kill you and your husband, I'll find your family. I'll kill that boy of yours. And that's the thing, man. You never threaten Mama Bear by killing her cubs. You never do that. You just don't do that. Because at that moment, Lois cuts loose and blasts Lex Luthor with every ounce of power that she has. And it's kind of cool because she blows him into space and then ultimately comes crashing back down to Earth out of sheer exhaustion. But within seconds, Lex is immediately back. And he's like, nice try, Superwoman. And he says, but not super enough. And that's when the shell starts to crack, right? I'm too weak for you. No, that's not right. I'm too strong. This isn't over. I will never stop hating Superman. I will never stop showing the world that it needs me. And that's when the real Lex steps back in again, except this time he's got his battle armor. And so literally he tries to reason, right, with this cloned version of Lex. He's like, it was a mistake to let you out, but I can still help you. And that's where the clone says, can you hear yourself? We would never help an enemy, especially Superman, ever. You betray everything we are. You forgot why we do what we do. This city owes us. This world owes us. And yet you allow yourself to become this, right? You are a failure. You are not Lex Luthor. And in turn, the real Lex looks at this guy and just says, but I am. And he fires up his armor and blows this guy's head apart. Literally kills him on the spot. Now, everyone's in shock in seeing this, right? Superman is totally leveled. Lena's like, oh my God. And then Mercy, watching all of this, is just like, Lex, welcome back. Because that was the plan all along. That was the scheme all along, with the realization that Lex would lose his memories or whatever the case happened to be, that he would ultimately be swayed by Superman to join the good side of things, right? To be a superhero, that he would abandon his cause in trying to destroy Superman or at least rid the world of him. The only way to actually bring back Lex, to turn him back into the person he'd always been, was to force him into a situation where he had to kill, because that's the differentiation between Superman and Lex. Truth to tell, they're two sides of the same coin. You can read Brian Azzarello's Lex Luthor if you don't believe me on that. It's a phenomenal story, and it illustrates that fact. They're both trying to achieve the same thing, a peaceful metropolis without any crime whatsoever, effectively a utopia. But Lex is willing to kill, and Superman is not. Now, when you couple that with Lex's perception of Superman, that the world shouldn't need an alien and that kind of thing, then that's how you end up with the Lex Luthor that you end up with right now. And that's why the debate rages back and forth, because Superman's just like, what did you do, right? And what Lex says is what you couldn't, the right thing. That's what I do every day. And Superman's like, you killed him. Right? And Lex is just like, and he would have killed me and my daughter and you and your wife and every single person in Metropolis. He was broken and he was never, ever going to stop. You might be the Man of Steel, but you are not the Man of Tomorrow. I am. And in turn, Superman's like, I'm done with you, and just ultimately walks away. And so Superman just says, right, like, Lois, Superwoman, check on Supercorp and Mercy. I'll meet you there after I get Luthor to Strikers. But Lois doesn't answer. She doesn't respond. And it's just like, what in the heck? And she just says, Superman, I can't. My powers are gone. Lois is back to her normal self, and Lex Luthor is back to being a villain. I loved this story arc. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will catch you all later. Peace.